So the first 2 weeks of Nisan, the Jewish months starts with the month of Nisan. The first 2 weeks are occupied by Jehoreb and Jedediah. And so that's the first 2 weeks. The third week, which would be Nisan 14, we have Passover where all the priests serve. And if you remember, I shared earlier, there are 3 times of the year when all the priests would serve. So this is the first time when all the priests would serve at Passover. So then the fourth week, we get into the third course, which is Harem, and we move on to the week 5, the fourth order, which is Sorim, and from there we go to week 6. The fifth order is Malchiyah. Notice the word Yah in his name. And then week 7, we have the sixth order is Mayim. And week 8, we have Hakos, is the 7th order. Okay, we're at the 7th order. The next order is Abiyah, and that's week 9. And after that week is Shavuot, and that's when all the priests serve. So that is week 10. So the 10th week into the new religious calendar, we have Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. And so all the priests would be there, including Zacharias. Let us go back to 1 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 7 through 10, and let's recount the scriptures about the 24 orders of priests. So in chapter 24 of 1 Chronicles, verse 7 through 10, and we see it says, "Now the first lot came first to Jeroboam, the second to Jediah, the third to Hiram, the fourth to Sarim, the fifth to Malchiyah, the sixth to Mayim, the seventh to Hakos, and the eighth to Abiyah." And so we stop right there with the 24 priests, because this is the order of Abiyah that we are concerned with in discerning what time Yeshua the Messiah was born. So we see here that the 8th order of priests is called Abiyah. And Abiyah, which we already have discussed, means the worshiper of Yah. And we already know that Yah is the shortened version of Yahweh. And we already talked before that Yahweh is the personal name, or just the name of the Creator, of the Father. It's not really God, because God is a title. And so we actually refer to Elohim more than we do the word God. So Elohim, or God, is a title, and Yahweh, or Yah, is the name of Elohim, or God. And so Abiyah is the order of Zechariah, and Zechariah is the father of John the Baptist. He's also the wife of Elizabeth. And so together with Elizabeth, his wife, they conceive John the Baptist. And so Abiyah is the worshiper of Yah, and Zechariah is of the order of Abiyah that we read here in 1 Chronicles 24, verse 10. And so when we can discern or define what the word order is, we've already talked about. An order is like a sequence. It's a turn or rotation. So Zechariah's turn is the 8th one. He's the 8th order of priests. So whenever we're trying to find out when things happen in the Bible, it's helpful to know what is the background, what is the circumstances, what are the setting events that is happening, so we can properly understand what is going on. So when we try to understand when Jesus was born, we have to understand that there are certain events that happened before and during his birth that are going on, that are linked to the biblical feasts. In the last part of this teaching, the first part of this teaching, we got a little bit into the biblical feast of Shavuot. And so I want to continue on with that, because we have to understand the feast to understand what is going on when Zechariah and Elizabeth conceive John the Baptist. And we also have to understand the feasts for when John the Baptist is born, when Yeshua is born, and how their relationship is connected. So we have to understand the feast. So we're going to continue a little bit on that understanding. So we have to understand, first of all, when we do the feasts, we first have to understand that the new month is determined by what the new moon is. So we go back to Genesis 1:14, where it says, "And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." So the moon becomes a sign for us to know when the feasts start, when the feast cycle starts, when the religious calendar starts. So when we're talking about the religious calendar, we're talking about the feast calendar or the feast cycle. And so we have to know when the feasts are coming around, and that's gonna require us to be able to identify what a new moon is, because the new moon tells us when the new month is. So the seasons here in Genesis 1:14 refers to the Moedim, or the annual feast. Now the Moedim can also refer to the weekly Shabbat too. So we also need to identify that all of the feasts, whether they're the annual feasts or the weekly feast of Shabbat, they are called Moedim, and Moedim means an appointed time. So it is in Genesis 1:14, it is defined as the signs. So we also know that in studying Scripture that the sun and moon work together to determine the days and the months, and we also have the celestial signs of the stars, which will also show us the signs, the seasons, and the years. So when we study the arrangement of the the stars in the sky, we can see the order or the setting up or the passing of the years. So the sun, moon, and stars all work together to determine the days, the months, the weeks, and the years. And we also see that they're all working together to establish when the appointed times are. And so we know the new month is set by the new moon, and we have to study diligently to find out what is our interpretation, our understanding, our belief, the truth of when the new moon is. So we can determine that Rosh Chodesh by studying Hebrew. Rosh Chodesh means new moon. Rosh means new, and Kodesh means moon. And so moon and month can mean the same word, or the same definition rather. They're interchangeable. So moon and month both mean Kodesh. New moon can be a moon conjuncture or a crescent moon, depending on what your understanding of a new moon is. There are also other calendars out there, the Enoch calendar, there is the lunar calendar, and probably a few others out there that people lend their beliefs to. My personal belief and teaching is that the new moon, new month is the moon conjuncture, or when the moon is dark each month. And so we have to understand that there are two calendars going on at the same time as they relate to us in keeping the feast calendar. So those of us in the United States, or most of the world for that matter, goes by a Gregorian calendar. And the Gregorian calendar is a calendar that goes from January to January. It is the typical calendar that we have hanging up in our homes, at our offices, our workplaces is the one that we go by in our lives. So that's one calendar we have to keep in order to relate to other people in the world. We also have a Jewish civil calendar that goes for 12 months, and that starts in the fall at Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets, and that's typically in September. And so that is the new month. I mean, the new year in the Jewish calendar. And so that goes from a September to September. Gregorian calendar from January to January, and then we have the religious or the feast calendar that starts around Passover in the springtime, in the month of Abib, in the springtime when things are starting to grow out of the darkness of winter. So these are our three calendars. We have Gregorian, a Jewish civil calendar, and a religious feast calendar. So now getting back to the 24 courses of priests, we can see here as the chart is on the screen about how the feasts fit in with the courses of the priests. So understanding how the courses of the priests work is important. So it works like this. There are 24 orders of priests, and Abiyah is just one of them. So each of the priests took a turn that lasted from one Sabbath to the next Sabbath, so basically a week. But 3 times a year, they were all required to come and serve at the temple in Jerusalem to help with the feasts, because you would need all of the priests, because three times a year, Jerusalem was very busy, because in Deuteronomy we see that it was required 3 times a year for all the males to come up to Jerusalem. So 3 times a year all the priests served, but the rest of the time of the year, each priest took a turn to facilitate their service at the temple. The 24 courses are divided up among the 24 priests that were in the different orders. And so in this chart here, we see that the first week was served by Jarib, and that would have been at Nisan 1, the beginning of months that we see that are described in the book of Exodus. And then we go on to week 2 with Jediah, and then the third week is where it's Passover. That is where all the priests would come and serve. And then after Passover, we go on to the third week with Harim, the fourth week is Sarim, the fifth week with Micaiah, the sixth week Mayim, the seventh week with Hakos, and the eighth week would be Abiyah, and that's week 9. So after week 9, all the priests would come and serve, and that would be at Shavuot, and that would be week 10. And so then after Shavuot, it continues on with Yeshua order, the Shechaniah order, and so on and so forth. And then at Sukkot, all of the Sukkot time, all of the priests come once again to serve in the temple. And then after Sukkot, we start the order all over again, because we've already reached, by the time Sukkot has come around, we have reached all the 24 orders, and so the order starts over once again. And then by the time we get to the ninth order of the second rotation, in other words, it would have been the month of Kislev at Hanukkah, where we have the 9th order of the order of Shechaniah. We see that Yeshua is conceived at Hanukkah. So this is when the light of the world, Yeshua, Jesus, comes into the world. He is conceived at Hanukkah. So getting back to the feasts, we see here in Exodus 12:2 that this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So when we were talking about a little while ago about the feast calendar, the religious calendar starting in around Passover time, around March or April, this is what we're referring to in Scripture is Exodus 12:2, saying that this shall be the beginning of months. This is when the beginning of the feast cycle works. So when we see here in Exodus 12, when it says it shall be the beginning of months, this is what we're talking about. The months would refer to the collection of the months, the collection of moon cycles that we're looking at in determining the feast calendar or the religious calendar. This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So the first month of the year to us would be the month of Abib, or in the Jewish calendar it is called the month of Nisan. So the beginning of months, or the month of Abib, would be March or April. So we have to understand that Abib means the ripeness of the barley harvest. So 3 times a year there is actually a time of first fruits. The first fruit would be the barley harvest. The second harvest, which would be in the summertime, would be the wheat harvest. And the third first fruit time would be at Sukkot, and that is the fruit tree harvest, or the tree harvest. So the religious calendar will begin on the first day of the month of Nisan. That is the Jewish calendar name. And so we need to know when the months start so that we can determine when this beginning of month starts. So we need to know when our moon cycles begin and end. We need to know what is the proper understanding of when a new month is, when a new moon is. So when we know when the very first month of the religious calendar is in the month of Abib, we can start counting properly through the months and calculating and observing when the new moon, the new months are, and we can calculate and observe when the new feasts have arrived. And so when we look at Passover, we have to understand that the Passover is not a Jewish feast, and it's definitely not man's feasts. These feasts are God's feasts. In fact, it says here in Leviticus 23 verse 2, it says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and say to them concerning the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feasts." So we see here, these are not the feasts of the Jews, but they're the feasts of Yahweh. And so these are not Jewish feasts, they're not man's feasts, they are God's feasts, they are biblical feasts, and they're part of God's calendar. When we want to discover when the real birth of Jesus really happened, we have to investigate this thing called the John connection. So we're talking about John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus. He is born first, prior to Jesus. He is actually born 6 months prior before Jesus. So we have to establish this John connection. We have to establish the true date of the birth of Jesus with understanding this John the Baptist connection. So we also need to identify who the family of Jesus was, knowing that this is really important. What relationship does John the Baptist, Zacharias, Elizabeth, Mary or Miriam, and Joseph or Joseph, what relationship did they have with Jesus in establishing his birth? We need to kind of, at this time, kind of do a summary of the birth timeline of Yeshua. So first, we need to understand that in June, when Shavuot is happening, John the Baptist is conceived. And we read about this in the book of Luke. And then 6 months later, we can calculate that at the time of Hanukkah, in the month of Kislev, we have Yeshua, or Jesus, being conceived. So at Shavuot, John the Baptist is conceived, and then Yeshua, or Jesus, is conceived. Very important to be able to get these things straight. And then in March or April at Passover time, John the Baptist is born. And then 6 months later, 6 months following Passover, we have the biblical feast of Sukkot. And then this, we finally discover, this is when Jesus is actually born. He is born at the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot. And so Sukkot is the time of temporary dwellings. And this is very fitting because God came in the form of Jesus in a temporary dwelling. He came in the flesh, which is a temporary dwelling. We ourselves are considered temporary dwellings. So at Sukkot, we have this thing that we live in, which are called sukkahs, or tents. And these are considered temporary dwellings. So when we look in the book of John, in the first chapter, it says the Word became flesh. So we understand that the Word is Jesus, or Yeshua. The Word became flesh, where God himself became flesh, became Jesus in the carnate form. And so this happens at Sukkot. So Yeshua, or Jesus, is born 6 months later after John the Baptist is at Sukkot. And so we know that John is born at Passover, and this is going to be at the time of March or April at Passover time. And then 6 months later, after Passover, we have Sukkot, and Sukkot is September or October. So going back to 1 Chronicles 24, in the 24 courses, we see here in 1 Chronicles 24:1 and 24:2, it says here, now these are the divisions of the sons of Aharon. The sons of Aharon, Nadab and Abihu and Eleazar and Ithamar. And these are the sons of Aaron. But Nadab and Abihu died prematurely, and they had no children. So therefore Eleazar and Ithamar executed the priest's office. So all the 24 orders of priests that are listed here in 1 Chronicles 24 came from Eleazar and Ithamar. So they're their heirs, their children. And they're the ones that inherited the role of the priests. And so we see that their names are Yeharib, Yediah, Harim, Se'arim, Melekiah, Mayamim, Hakos, Abiyah, Yeshua, Shekinah, Elisab, Yakim, Hupa, Yeshabib, Belgah, Immer, Hizir, Aphises, Pethiah, Yakazekel, Yakin, Gamul, Delilah, and Maziah. And then we look at the calendar here of what it relates to with the feasts. We see for April and June, which is what we're really concerned with at the moment in our discussion, is we see in the month of April and June we have the orders of 1 through 8, because we're shooting up to the 8th order of Abiyah, which we're concerned with establishing the starting point of when Jesus was born. So in April of 2019, we had the new moon on April 3rd. That became the new moon. And then, so on that preceding Sabbath, we had order number 1 beginning. And then the Sabbath the following week is order number 2. And then when we look here on April 17th, that was the 14th day of the new month of Abib. And so that is Passover. And then that following Sabbath would be where all the priests would serve, because during this time, when all the males would come up Jerusalem to keep the feast of unleavened bread, they would all be there for Passover, unleavened bread, and the feast of first fruits. All of them are all happening at that close proximity of each other. So after the feast of unleavened bread is over with, we have the fourth Sabbath of the new month, and that will be the third order. And then we kind of pass over the month of May, and then when we get to the second week, the second Sabbath of June, which is, June 2019 is looking at this calendar here, we see that we get into the eighth order of Abiyah, and that is going to be Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks. So it is the seventh Sabbath when we're counting the Omer. And so Omer really means counting, and from the Feast of First Fruits, we're counting 7 Sabbaths or 7 weeks, and then the day after that would be Shavuot, which is always on a Sunday. So during the second Sabbath of the third month of Sivan, we have the eighth order of Abiyah. So let's return to Luke chapter 1, verse 8. And it says, "And it came to pass that while he," meaning Zacharias, "he executed the priest's office," meaning that he was in the eighth order of Abiyah, "he executed the priest's office before God in the order of his course." So the order of Abiyah is the eighth order that he is a part of, and that fell around Shavuot, or the 10th week into the new religious calendar, and that again is in 1 Chronicles chapter 24. And just to revisit the idea that the religious calendar started 2 weeks before Passover, so that is when the first order would actually begin.